500 years ago, a hand-drawn map quietly came into existence, one that still refuses to stop asking questions. Drawn by an Ottoman admiral using sources already ancient in his own time, this map appears to show something impossible: a southern land long before Antarctica was officially discovered. Over the decades, it has sparked debates between historians and scientists, fueled documentaries, and inspired ideas about lost knowledge and forgotten worlds. But the real story is deeper, calmer, and far more fascinating than any headline. In this video, we'll carefully follow the evidence through old maps, ancient beliefs, modern science, and human curiosity to understand why this mystery still matters today and what it truly tells us about our past. Chapter 1. The Piri Reis Map emerges. In the quiet halls of Istanbul's Topkapi Palace, a folded piece of parchment sat unnoticed for centuries. It was not framed, it was not displayed. It rested among thousands of other documents, treated as just another artifact from the long Ottoman past. No one walking those halls in the early 1900s suspected that this fragile map would one day become one of the most debated documents in the history of cartography. The year was 1929. Turkey was in the middle of reshaping its national identity after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Scholars were cataloging and preserving historical materials inside the palace when they came across a curious fragment. It was clearly old, drawn on gazelle skin, covered in careful handwriting, illustrated with ships, animals, and coastlines. But what caught attention was not the artistry. It was what the map appeared to show. This fragment would later be identified as part of the Piri Reis Map, dated to the year 1513. Only about 1/3 of the original map survives, but even this partial section was enough to raise questions that still haven't fully settled. It showed the western coast of Africa, parts of Europe, and the eastern coastline of South America. That alone was impressive for its time. But below South America was something harder to explain: a large southern landmass drawn with confidence, not guesswork. To understand why this mattered, it helps to understand who made the map. The man behind it was Piri Reis, born around 1470 in Gallipoli, a strategic port town of the Ottoman Navy. He was not a scholar working in isolation. He was a sailor, a naval commander, a man who spent years at sea during a period when coastlines were learned the hard way, through storms, shipwrecks, and hard-earned experience. Piri Reis began his career under the command of his uncle, Kemal Reis, a well-known Ottoman admiral. Together, they sailed across the Mediterranean, engaging in naval battles and privateering missions. These journeys exposed Piri Reis to ports, maps, and sailors from many cultures. Spanish, Portuguese, Arab, and Italian navigators all crossed paths in these waters, and with them came charts, sketches, and navigational knowledge. By the early 1500s, the world was changing fast. Christopher Columbus had crossed the Atlantic. Portuguese explorers were mapping Africa's coast. Spain was claiming land across the ocean. Maps were no longer just decorative objects. They were tools of power. In 1513, Piri Reis decided to compile a world map, not by sailing the entire globe himself, but by gathering what already existed. On the map itself, he left written notes explaining his sources. He claimed to have used around 20 earlier maps and charts. Some were Portuguese, some were Arab. Some, he said, were much older, passed down from earlier civilizations. One source was said to be a map used by Columbus himself. This is an important point. Piri Reis never claimed originality in the modern sense. He saw himself as a compiler, someone bringing scattered knowledge together into one coherent image. This was common practice at the time. Cartography was cumulative. Each map was built on the bones of older ones. When historians later examined the surviving fragment, they found that much of it made sense for its era. The African coastline aligns closely with Portuguese charts from the late 15th century. The Atlantic islands appear where they should. The coast of South America, while not perfect, follows the general shape explorers were beginning to understand. But the southern section changed everything. Early scholars assumed it was simply South America stretched too far east or south. Map projections in the 1500s were imperfect, and distortion was common. When a curved earth is flattened onto parchment, shapes warp. This explanation satisfied most historians at first. The map was impressive, but not mysterious. That view began to shift decades later, when more detailed comparisons were made. Some researchers noticed that the southern coastline on the map did not resemble any known part of South America as clearly as the northern sections did. Instead of tapering inward, it extended outward. The angles were different. The proportions felt wrong for a simple distortion. At the same time, Antarctic exploration was advancing. By the mid-20th century, scientists were using seismic surveys to map the continent beneath its ice. These studies revealed the hidden coastline of Antarctica, buried under miles of frozen layers. When those ice-free coastlines were compared with the Piri Reis Map, certain similarities were noted. Not exact matches, not perfect alignments, but enough overlap to raise eyebrows, especially among researchers outside mainstream academic circles. This was the moment when the map began to move from historical curiosity into public mystery. Before drawing conclusions, historians took a step back. The first question was basic but essential. Was the map authentic? Detailed testing followed. The parchment was analyzed and confirmed to be animal skin consistent with early 16th century Ottoman materials. The ink composition matched known formulas of the time. The handwriting style aligned with Ottoman Turkish used in the early 1500s. Even the pigments used for decoration fit the period. No signs of modern tampering were found. No anachronistic materials. No chemical inconsistencies. In short, the map was real. That fact alone didn't prove what the southern landmass represented, but it closed the door on one easy explanation. This was not a modern forgery or an imaginative fake created long after Antarctica was known. The map was genuinely old, created at a time when Antarctica, at least officially, had not yet entered human records. And yet it was there, drawn carefully, labeled confidently, not sketched as a vague idea, but shaped like a place. By the time scholars finished authenticating the document, the conversation had shifted. The question was no longer whether the map was real. It was what kind of knowledge Piri Reis had access to when he drew it. To answer that, the story has to move backward even further, into the lost maps he claimed to have used and the older geographic ideas that shaped how people once imagined the world. That trail begins with how ancient and medieval civilizations thought about the southern edge of the Earth, long before anyone set foot on Antarctica. Chapter 2, the Antarctic Coastline Debate. When the Piri Reis Map resurfaced in the early 20th century, it was first treated as a remarkable but understandable artifact of early navigation. For years, most scholars agreed that the southern landmass drawn beneath South America was simply a distorted extension of that continent. Early maps stretched and bent coastlines all the time. There seemed to be no urgent reason to look deeper. That calm did not last. By the 1950s, Antarctica was no longer a blank space at the bottom of the world. Scientific expeditions had begun to peel back the ice, not by digging, but by using seismic surveys and gravity measurements. These tools allowed researchers to estimate the shape of the land buried beneath miles of ice. For the first time, scientists could trace the true outline of the Antarctic continent, even though it remained hidden from sight. It was during this period that a small group of researchers began comparing those newly reconstructed coastlines with old maps. One of those maps was the Piri Reis fragment. The comparisons were not casual. Researchers laid transparent overlays of Antarctic coastline data over photographs of the map. They adjusted for scale and rotation, trying to account for the way early cartographers compressed space. What caught their attention was not a perfect match, but something subtler. Certain curves along the southern edge of the Piri Reis Map seemed to echo the shape of parts of Antarctica's coast, especially regions along what is now known as Queen Maud Land. Queen Maud Land stretches across a large section of eastern Antarctica. Modern surveys show a coastline that curves inward and outward in a way that, when simplified, can resemble the lines on the map. Rivers and mountain markings on the Piri Reis Map also appeared to some eyes to line up with subglacial features later identified through radar and seismic data. These observations did not come from ancient historians, but from people working in navigation, engineering, and surveying. They were trained to notice patterns in landforms. Some had backgrounds in military mapping, where recognizing distorted but meaningful shapes was part of the job. The most famous of these comparisons emerged during the early Cold War period, when polar research was receiving heavy funding. Antarctica had become strategically important, and with that attention came deeper interest in its history. When claims surfaced suggesting that an early 16th century map might show parts of the continent without ice, the idea spread quickly beyond academic journals. At first glance, the claim felt unsettling. According to established geology and climate science, Antarctica has been covered by ice for millions of years. While there were warmer periods in the distant past, those occurred long before humans existed. An ice-free Antarctica mapped by people would challenge not just cartography, but the timeline of human civilization itself. Because of that, mainstream scholars responded carefully and often skeptically. Cartographers pointed out that the Piri Reis Map was never meant to be a precise, modern-style representation. It was drawn using Portolan-style techniques, focused on coastlines useful for navigation, rather than strict geographic accuracy. These maps relied on compass bearings and estimated distances, not longitude and latitude as we understand them today. Projection errors were another major issue. Flattening a spherical Earth onto a flat surface forces distortion. Early map makers had no unified projection system. They often stitched together regional maps, each with its own scale and orientation. When those pieces met, coastlines could stretch or rotate in unexpected ways. From this perspective, the southern landmass could still be South America, warped by the limits of 16th century knowledge. The coastline of Patagonia, when extended and rotated, can resemble other landforms if viewed without modern reference points. To many historians, this explanation remained the simplest. There was also the question of artistic interpretation. Maps of that era were not just tools, they were visual statements. Cartographers filled unknown areas with mountains, rivers, and illustrations to suggest completeness, even when data was limited. What looked like rivers on the Piri Reis map could be decorative or symbolic rather than literal geography. Critics also noted that the supposed Antarctic section is attached directly to South America on the map, with no clear separation by ocean. If Piri Reis or his sources knew of a separate southern continent, why not show open water between the two? Supporters of the Antarctic interpretation responded with their own points. They argued that the map's attachment could reflect older geographic theories, especially the long-standing belief in a massive southern land balancing the northern continents. In that worldview, separation by water was not always emphasized. They also emphasized Piri Reis's written notes. On the map, he claimed to have used much older sources, some copied many times over centuries. If those source maps were already distorted or incomplete, Piri Reis may have preserved their errors without realizing it. What both sides agreed on was one thing. The debate could not be settled by a single comparison or claim. The map did not shout its meaning, it whispered possibilities. By the late 20th century, most academic institutions leaned toward caution. The Antarctic resemblance was acknowledged as interesting, but not conclusive. Geological timelines, ice core data, and tectonic history all pointed to a frozen continent long before any mapmaker could have drawn it from observation. Yet the discussion never fully closed. The reason is simple. The Piri Reis map does not behave like a mistake that can be easily dismissed. Its northern sections are accurate enough to prove serious source material. Its annotations show a thoughtful compiler, not a careless artist. And its southern edge sits in an uncomfortable space between coincidence and intention. As researchers continued to refine Antarctic subglacial maps, new details emerged. Some features once thought to align no longer did. Others became clearer. The picture shifted, not toward certainty, but toward complexity. Understanding that complexity requires stepping away from the idea of a single map holding a single secret. It means looking at how early knowledge traveled, how maps were copied, and how ideas about the southern world evolved long before Antarctica had a name. Chapter 3: Antarctica Before the Ice. To understand why the idea of an ice-free Antarctica causes so much debate, we first have to step away from old maps and return to the ground itself. Or more accurately, to what lies beneath the ice. Today, Antarctica is almost entirely covered by ice. In some places, that ice is more than 2 miles thick. It feels permanent, immovable, ancient beyond measure. But science tells a more complicated story. Antarctica was not always frozen. The question is not whether it was ever ice-free, but when. Modern understanding of Antarctica's past does not come from legends or documents. It comes from ice cores, sediment layers, and the slow language of geology. These records don't speak in human years, they speak in millions. Ice cores are long cylinders drilled straight down through the Antarctic ice sheet. Some extend more than 3 kilometers deep. Each layer of ice represents a year, sometimes a season, capturing tiny air bubbles trapped at the moment the snow fell. These bubbles preserve ancient atmospheres, allowing scientists to measure carbon dioxide levels, temperature changes, and even volcanic eruptions from the distant past. The deepest Antarctic ice cores reach back around 800,000 years. Within that span, the record is clear. Antarctica has been locked in cycles of glacial and slightly less glacial conditions. There are warmer periods and colder periods, but none show a fully ice-free continent during the time humans have existed. To look further back, scientists turn to sediment cores taken from the ocean floor around Antarctica. These sediments build up slowly, grain by grain, carrying pollen, microorganisms, and chemical signatures that reflect the climate at the time they were deposited. Those sediments tell us that Antarctica once supported forests. Around 90 million years ago, during the Cretaceous period, Antarctica was much warmer. Fossilized pollen and plant remains show that parts of the continent were covered with dense vegetation. Rivers flowed. Dinosaurs walked across landscapes that today sit beneath ice and darkness. Even later, around 34 million years ago, Antarctica began its long descent into ice. This moment, known as the Eocene-Oligocene transition, marks the formation of a permanent Antarctic ice sheet. Global temperatures dropped, ocean currents shifted. The continent became isolated by the circumpolar current, cutting it off from warmer waters. From that point on, ice became the dominant feature of Antarctica. There were still fluctuations. During warmer intervals, the ice sheet shrank. Coastlines shifted slightly. Some areas may have been seasonally ice-free, but the core fact remains. By the time anatomically modern humans appeared, Antarctica had already been frozen for tens of millions of years. This timeline is the central reason why claims about an ice-free Antarctic map are controversial. If a map appears to show Antarctica without ice, it would suggest one of two things. Either the map is being misinterpreted, or it is based on knowledge from a time far earlier than any known human civilization. There is no comfortable middle ground. Climate scientists emphasize that even during the warmest periods of the last million years, Antarctica did not resemble a green or easily navigable landmass. Ice covered the interior. Glaciers reached the sea. The coastline may have shifted by tens of kilometers, but the continent was never open in a way that would allow detailed coastal surveying by humans. Tectonic studies reinforce this view. Antarctica's position has been relatively stable for tens of millions of years. While it once sat closer to other landmasses, continental drift moved it south long before humans appeared. Its isolation contributed to its cooling. There is no evidence of a recent geological event that would have stripped the ice away and then replaced it within human history. This scientific consensus does not come from one discipline alone. It is shared across climatology, geology, oceanography, and paleontology. Each field approaches the problem differently, yet they arrive at the same broad conclusion. That does not mean science claims to know everything. There are still unanswered questions about how fast ice sheets can grow or retreat under extreme conditions. Some research suggests that parts of Antarctica may have lost ice more rapidly in the past than once believed. But rapid in geological terms still means thousands to tens of thousands of years, not decades or centuries. For historians examining old maps, this creates a tension. The map is real. The science is solid. The two don't easily align. Because of that, most researchers do not see the Piri Reis Map as evidence of a forgotten ice-free Antarctica. Instead, they see it as a case study in how human interpretation can collide with deep time. Our instinct is to measure the past in human scales. Science forces us to think in spans that dwarf civilization itself. Chapter 4: Lost Source Maps and Ancient Knowledge. One of the most important parts of the Piri Reis Map is not the coastline, or the drawings, or even the mysterious southern land. It is the writing. Scattered across the map are short notes written by Piri Reis himself. These comments are calm, practical, and surprisingly open. They explain where his information came from, and just as importantly, where it did not. Piri Reis did not claim discovery. He did not present himself as a lone genius revealing hidden lands. Instead, he described his map as a careful collection of earlier sources. In one note, he wrote that he used around 20 charts and maps. Some were Portuguese, some were Arab, and some, he said, were from the time of Alexander the Great. That single line has fueled more debate than any drawing on the map. To modern ears, the phrase sounds dramatic. It invites thoughts of lost empires and secret knowledge. But to historians, it points to something far more familiar: copying. In the ancient and medieval world, maps rarely survived in their original form. Papyrus decayed, parchment was reused, libraries burned, knowledge moved forward by being copied again and again, often without preserving the original author's name. A map from the Hellenistic period might pass through Roman hands, then Byzantine scholars, then Islamic geographers, before reaching an Ottoman admiral centuries later. By the time Piri Reis encountered such material, the original map might have been gone for 1,000 years. What remained was a chain of copies, each one slightly altered. The era he referenced, associated with Alexander the Great, was a turning point in geographic knowledge. After Alexander's conquest in the 4th century BCE, Greek scholars suddenly had access to reports from Egypt, Persia, Central Asia, and India. This sparked a wave of map-making unlike anything before it. Thinkers like Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the Earth with surprising accuracy. Others began dividing the world into lines of latitude and longitude. They debated the size of unknown lands and speculated about what lay beyond the known seas. Some of their maps likely included theoretical southern continents, not because they had been visited, but because symmetry made sense to them. Very few of these Greek maps survive today. We know them mostly through descriptions in later texts, but their influence is undeniable. Roman geographers copied them. Byzantine scholars preserved them. Islamic scholars expanded on them. During the Islamic Golden Age, roughly from the 8th to the 14th centuries, cartography flourished. Scholars translated Greek texts into Arabic, corrected errors, and added new information from trade routes stretching from Spain to China. Maps were not just copied, they were improved. By the time the Ottoman Empire rose to power, it inherited this layered tradition. Ottoman scholars had access to Arabic, Persian, and Greek works. Ports like Alexandria and Constantinople were crossroads of knowledge. Sailors carried charts alongside spices and stories. This is the world Piri Reis lived in. When he wrote that he used older maps, historians believe him, not because they want the mystery to be true, but because his claim fits what we know about how knowledge moved. Captured maps from Spanish and Portuguese ships were common. Naval conflict made that inevitable. Older Islamic charts were stored in libraries and private collections. Some may have traced their origins back centuries. What those maps showed is another matter. Historians are careful here. They do not assume ancient maps were accurate in the modern sense. Coastlines were often schematic. Distances were estimated. Unknown areas were filled with educated guesses. A southern landmass might appear simply because scholars believed one should exist. This helps explain why a map could show a coastline that looks detailed without being based on direct observation. A copied shape can survive long after its original meaning is lost. It also explains why no physical ancient map of Antarctica has ever been found. There are no Greek descriptions of polar exploration, no Roman accounts of southern ice, no Islamic travel records describing a frozen continent at the end of the world. Silence matters. The idea of lost source maps does not require a lost civilization. It requires only time, copying, and imperfect transmission. A coastline drawn once as theory can be copied as fact generations later. By the time it reaches a map like Piri Reis's, it may feel authoritative, even if its origins were speculative. Piri Reis himself seemed aware of this uncertainty. His notes do not boast. They explain. They acknowledge gaps. He wrote as a compiler, not a discoverer. That honesty is part of why historians trust him. Chapter 5: Early Antarctic Sightings. Before 1820, long before Antarctica was officially discovered in 1820, sailors had already pushed deep into the southern oceans. They did not know what waited beyond the fog and ice. Many of them never expected to find land at all, but their journeys planted the earliest seeds of what would later become one of the most persistent geographic ideas in history. For centuries, Europeans believed in a vast southern continent known as Terra Australis. This belief did not come from exploration, but from logic. Ancient scholars argued that the land in the north must be balanced by land in the south. It was symmetry, not evidence. Maps began to show this imagined continent long before anyone had sailed near Antarctica. By the late 1400s and early 1500s, exploration was no longer theoretical. Ships were moving farther south than ever before, and sailors were reporting unfamiliar seas, colder winds, and strange skies. One of the earliest names connected to these southern voyages is Amerigo Vespucci. Between 1497 and 1504, Vespucci took part in several expeditions along the coast of South America. During one voyage, he sailed far enough south to encounter colder temperatures and longer nights. In his letters, he described harsh conditions and unfamiliar stars. Later readers would point to these accounts as possible hints of Antarctica, but a closer look tells a more careful story. Vespucci never claimed to see a southern continent covered in ice. He never described glaciers, ice shelves, or land beyond the southern tip of South America. His journeys likely reached regions near modern-day Patagonia. The cold he described was real, but it came from latitude, not polar ice. Still, his writings mattered. They reinforced the idea that the southern world was vast and unknown. Each voyage that pushed south without reaching an edge made Terra Australis feel more real, not less. Throughout the 16th and 17th centuries, sailors continued to test the southern oceans. Ferdinand Magellan passed through the strait that now bears his name in 1520, proving that South America had a southern end. But even then, the land beyond remained unseen. The open ocean that followed only deepened the mystery. Dutch, Spanish, and later British navigators recorded massive swells, powerful currents, and cold winds far below the equator. These reports did not confirm Antarctica, but they suggested something large and cold was influencing the seas. Maps from this period reflect that uncertainty. Terra Australis was still drawn, but its shape changed constantly. Sometimes it connected to South America. Other times it floated independently. Coastlines appeared and disappeared from one map to the next. Importantly, none of these explorers produced clear, first-hand descriptions of Antarctic land. There were no detailed sketches of icy shores, no written accounts of glaciers meeting the sea. What they encountered were conditions, not continents. By the 18th century, exploration became more deliberate. Governments funded voyages specifically to search for the southern continent. Ships were better built. Navigation tools improved. Yet even then, success was elusive. In the 1770s, Captain James Cook crossed the Antarctic Circle multiple times. He sailed farther south than any human before him. He encountered pack ice stretching to the horizon. He recorded the cold, the fog, and the danger. But he never saw the Antarctic mainland. Cook concluded that if a southern continent existed, it was likely locked behind ice and of little use. His authority carried weight. For a time, interest in Terra Australis faded. It was not until 1820 that several expeditions, operating independently, finally reported sightings of the Antarctic continent. Russian, British, and American ships all claimed encounters with ice-covered land within months of each other. From that point on, Antarctica moved from theory to fact. Looking back, historians are careful not to blur the line between anticipation and discovery. Early sailors reached Antarctic waters. They felt the continent's presence through currents and climate, but they did not map it. They did not walk its shores, and they did not describe it clearly. This distinction matters when evaluating old maps like the Piri Reis Map. Suggestive voyages are not the same as surveyed coastlines. Belief is not the same as observation. Chapter 6. The Role of Map Projection Errors. When modern viewers look at an old map, there is a natural instinct to judge it by modern standards. We expect north to be up. We expect coastlines to follow familiar shapes. And when they do not, we start searching for hidden meaning. But for professional cartographers, especially those who study early maps, distortion is not a warning sign. It is the starting point. To understand why the southern part of the Piri Reis Map can resemble Antarctica to some eyes, we first have to understand how maps were actually made in the early 16th century. Map projection is the process of turning a round Earth into a flat image. Today, this involves mathematics, coordinates, and precise formulas. In Piri Reis's time, none of that existed in a unified form. Longitude could not be measured accurately at sea, latitude could be estimated, but even that depended on weather, instruments, and experience. As a result, early maps were built piece by piece. Cartographers relied heavily on portolan charts. These were practical sailing maps designed for coastal navigation. They focused on shorelines, ports, and compass directions. Inland areas were often ignored or filled in later for appearance. Portolan charts worked well locally, but they were never meant to be stitched together into global maps. When Piri Reis compiled his world map, he was combining multiple sources, each drawn with its own internal logic. One chart might exaggerate distance along the east-west axis, another might compress north-south space. When merged, those differences did not cancel out. They stacked. This is where stretching and rotation come into play. If a coastline is copied from one map and rotated slightly to fit another, its shape can change dramatically. A bend that once faced west might now face south. A gradual curve can appear sharper or flatter depending on scale. These changes are subtle when viewed in isolation, but dramatic when applied to an entire continent. Modern cartographers studying the Piri Reis Map have demonstrated this effect using digital tools. When the southern coast of South America is stretched, rotated, and projected using early-style methods, parts of it can take on a shape that loosely resembles segments of Antarctica. Not because the mapmaker knew Antarctica, but because distortion can mimic coincidence. Another key issue is scale. Early mapmakers did not work with consistent scale across an entire map. Regions that were well known, such as the Mediterranean, were often drawn larger and more carefully. Distant or newly explored areas were compressed or expanded, depending on the source material. This uneven scaling can make coastlines appear longer, shorter, or positioned incorrectly relative to one another. In the case of the Piri Reis Map, the South American coastline grows increasingly distorted as it moves south. This is exactly what cartographers would expect if the source charts became less reliable farther from familiar waters. The southern tip stretches outward, creating the impression of a separate landmass. Orientation adds another layer. Not all early maps placed north at the top. Some were oriented eastward, others were adjusted for navigation rather than geography. When such maps are later reoriented to match modern conventions, shapes can appear unfamiliar. What once made sense to a sailor following compass lines can look strange to a modern viewer trained on satellite imagery. This is why professional historians emphasize projection math over mystery. When scholars compare old maps to modern coastlines, they do not look for perfect matches. They look for systematic distortion. If an error repeats in a consistent way across a map, it suggests a projection issue, not secret knowledge. In the Piri Reis Map, distortions increase with distance from known regions. That pattern aligns with expected limitations of early cartography. There is also the human factor. Maps were hand-drawn, copying errors accumulated. A single mistaken curve could be reproduced for generations. Over time, the original reason for a shape could be forgotten, while the shape itself gained authority simply by being repeated. This does not make early cartographers careless. On the contrary, they worked within the best systems available to them. Their goal was usefulness, not perfection. From an academic perspective, this is why projection-based explanations remain dominant today. They require no lost continents, no vanished civilizations, and no rejection of established climate science. They rely on well-documented practices and limitations of historical mapmaking. That does not mean the discussion is closed. It means it is grounded. Chapter 7. The Oronteus Finaeus Map Comparison. By the time the Piri Reis Map began attracting serious attention in the 20th century, it was no longer alone. Researchers looking through early modern cartography noticed something important. Other maps, created decades later and thousands of miles away, seemed to show a similar idea at the bottom of the world. One of the most frequently mentioned was drawn in 1531 by Oronteus Fine, also known by the Latinized name Oronteus Finaeus. Unlike Piri Reis, Fine was not a sailor. He was a mathematician, an astronomer, and a professor in Paris. His work focused on geometry, instruments, and mathematical education. When he created his world map, he did so from a desk, not a deck. That distinction matters. Fine's map presents a large southern continent labeled as Terra Australis. It stretches around the bottom of the globe, clearly separate from South America. What made it stand out, especially to later audiences, was detail. Rivers cut across the land. Mountain ranges rise inland. The continent looked structured, almost lived in. To someone seeing it for the first time, the map can feel startlingly confident. In the mid-20th century, when Antarctic research accelerated and subglacial mapping revealed rivers and mountain systems beneath the ice, comparisons began almost immediately. How, some asked, could a 16th century scholar draw rivers on a continent that was supposedly frozen solid for millions of years? This question helped reignite public fascination with old maps. But historians approach the Oronteus Finaeus map very differently than casual observers do. The first thing they point out is timing. Finaeus' map appeared in 1531, a period when Terra Australis was already deeply embedded in European geographic thought. This was not a new idea. It was inherited from classical philosophy and reinforced by medieval tradition. Scholars believed the Earth needed balance. Too much land in the north required land in the south. The southern continent, in other words, was expected. Finaeus was also working during a moment when cartography was changing rapidly. New discoveries were constantly reshaping world maps. But those changes did not erase older theories overnight. Instead, maps became layered documents, blending observation with tradition. The rivers and mountains on Finaeus' southern continent did not come from exploration. They came from assumption. In early mapmaking, rivers were often drawn to make land seem realistic and complete. Mountains marked boundaries or added visual authority. These features helped maps feel believable, even when the land itself was hypothetical. This practice was not deception, it was convention. When historians compare Finaeus' map to the Piri Reis Map, the differences are just as important as the similarities. Piri Reis's southern landmass is attached to South America and lacks interior detail. Finaeus is separate and richly illustrated. One reflects compiled nautical charts. The other reflects academic theory. They are solving different problems. Supporters of the Antarctic interpretation often focus on the overlap. Both maps show a southern land. Both predate Antarctica's official discovery. Both appear confident. But historians caution that this overlap reflects shared ideas, not shared knowledge. There is also the issue of accuracy. When Finaeus' southern continent is compared to modern Antarctic coastlines, the resemblance fades quickly. Shapes do not align consistently. Proportions are off. Rivers flow in directions that make no geological sense. The map looks persuasive only when viewed without reference. This is why academic researchers place the Oronteus Finaeus map firmly in the category of theoretical geography. It represents what scholars thought should exist, not what had been seen. Still, the map matters. It shows that Piri Reis was not unique in depicting the southern world. He was part of a broader intellectual environment where old ideas and new discoveries overlapped in sometimes confusing ways. Maps were not snapshots of reality. They were arguments about it. In the 20th century, as interest in lost civilizations grew, Finaeus' map became a symbol. Books and documentaries presented it as supporting evidence that ancient knowledge once existed and was later lost. The visual impact was powerful. Rivers under ice made for compelling stories. But power is not proof. Historians emphasize that when multiple maps repeat the same imagined feature, it does not strengthen the claim. It strengthens the tradition. Terra Australis appears again and again because people expected it to be there. Chapter 8: How the Map Entered Modern Pop Culture. For more than 400 years, the Piri Reis Map existed quietly as a historical artifact. It was studied by specialists, cataloged in archives, and mentioned in academic circles. It was respected, but it was not famous. That changed in the middle of the 20th century when global politics, new technology, and mass media collided in a way no one could have predicted. The turning point came during the early years of the Cold War. After World War II, Antarctica became strategically important. The continent was no longer just a frozen wilderness. It was a place of scientific competition, military interest, and geopolitical curiosity. The United States, along with other nations, began large-scale Antarctic research programs. Among them was Operation High Jump, a massive U.S. Navy expedition that mapped large portions of the Antarctic coastline using aerial photography and radar. These new surveys produced something never seen before: detailed images of Antarctica's ice-covered edges and early estimates of what lay beneath. As these findings circulated within military and scientific communities, they also began to filter outward. It was in this environment that the Piri Reis Map resurfaced, not as a historical document, but as a curiosity with potential implications. Some researchers noticed that U.S. Navy personnel had access to early cartographic studies during this period. A few speculative articles suggested that naval analysts had compared ancient maps with modern Antarctic data. While there is no evidence that the Navy officially endorsed any extraordinary conclusions, the mere association with military research gave the map a new aura of importance. From there, the story escaped the archive. In the 1950s and 1960s, popular books began to reinterpret old maps for general audiences. Authors outside traditional academic history focused on visual coincidences rather than methodological caution. The southern landmass on the Piri Reis map was no longer discussed as a distorted coastline. It was presented as a revelation. Television amplified this shift. Early documentary programs, especially those focused on mysteries and unexplained history, found the map irresistible. It was visual. It was old. It seemed to challenge modern assumptions. Producers paired images of the map with newly revealed Antarctic coastlines, fading one into the other. The suggestion was subtle, but powerful. What if ancient knowledge was more advanced than we think? These programs rarely lied outright. Instead, they selected which facts to emphasize. They highlighted similarities. They downplayed uncertainty. Academic caveats were shortened or removed entirely. Over time, the map's context changed. In scholarly discussions, the Piri Reis Map was one example among many early modern charts. In popular culture, it became the map, the one that shouldn't exist, the one that hinted at lost civilizations, advanced ancient science, or forgotten global explorers. Books followed a similar pattern. Titles framed the map as evidence rather than artifact. Its annotations were treated as confessions of hidden truth rather than routine sourcing notes. Comparisons with Antarctica were presented visually, without discussing projection distortion or cartographic conventions. None of this required deception. It required only storytelling. The Cold War era was especially receptive to these ideas. Humanity had just unlocked nuclear power. Space exploration was beginning. Long-held assumptions were being overturned everywhere. The idea that history itself might be incomplete felt plausible, even exciting. By the 1970s and 1980s, the Piri Reis Map had become a staple of alternative history media. It appeared alongside discussions of sunken continents, unexplained ruins, and ancient technologies. It was no longer just a map, it was a symbol. Importantly, this transformation did not happen because historians failed to respond. Academic rebuttals existed. Journals published careful analyses explaining projection errors and historical context. But those responses moved slowly and reached smaller audiences. Television moved faster. A single documentary could reach millions. A striking image could linger longer than a careful footnote. Over time, repetition gave the story weight. Viewers encountered the same claims across different programs and assumed consensus where none existed. This is how the map entered modern pop culture, not through new discoveries, but through reframing. That does not mean public curiosity was misguided. The questions raised were real. How much knowledge has been lost? How reliable are our historical timelines? Could ancient people have known more than we assume? The problem was not curiosity, it was imbalance. By focusing on mystery without equal focus on method, popular media turned a complex historical artifact into a riddle with a predetermined answer. The map became evidence first and question second. Chapter 9: Academic Consensus versus Public Mystery. By the time the Piri Reis Map became widely known outside academic circles, two very different conversations were already taking shape. One was happening quietly, inside universities, museums, and research journals. The other was unfolding in books, documentaries, and late-night discussions filled with wonder. Both were looking at the same map. They were not seeing the same thing. Among historians and cartographers, a broad agreement slowly formed. The map was authentic. Piri Reis was a skilled compiler. His sources were real, varied, and historically plausible. But the map did not show an ice-free Antarctica. This conclusion did not come from a single study or authority. It emerged over decades of careful comparison. Scholars examined the map's coastlines alongside known early 16th century charts. They studied its annotations, ink, and materials. They reconstructed likely projection methods. When all of this evidence was considered together, the same pattern appeared again and again. The southern landmass fit within the limits of early modern cartography. From an academic perspective, that mattered more than visual resemblance. Historians tend to ask different questions than the public does. Instead of asking, "What does this look like?" they ask, "What tools did the mapmaker have? And what conventions guided their work?" When those questions are applied to the Piri Reis Map, the result is not mystery, but context. Climate scientists reached similar conclusions from a different direction. Their focus was not the map, but the planet. Ice cores, sediment records, and tectonic studies all point to a frozen Antarctica long before humans developed navigation. For the map to show an ice-free coastline based on observation, nearly every established climate timeline would need revision. That kind of revision requires overwhelming evidence. A single map, no matter how intriguing, is not enough. And yet, even within academia, there are open questions. Historians freely admit that we do not know all of Piri Reis's sources. Many maps from the medieval and ancient worlds have been lost. Libraries were destroyed, manuscripts decayed, wars erased archives. When Piri Reis wrote that he used older charts, scholars believe him. What those charts contained and how accurate they were remains uncertain. This uncertainty is often misunderstood. In popular discussions, uncertainty is treated as a gap waiting to be filled by revelation. In academic work, it is treated as a boundary. Scholars mark what they know, what they suspect, and what they cannot confirm. The space beyond that line is not a secret. It is simply unknown. This difference in mindset helps explain why disagreement persists. Public mystery thrives on unanswered questions. Academic research is cautious around them. When historians say, "We don't know exactly what this source was," they are not inviting speculation. They are setting limits. Another point of tension lies in how evidence is weighed. In popular media, visual similarity often carries great power. Two shapes that look alike feel meaningful. In scholarship, similarity must be consistent, measurable, and repeatable. A match that depends on selective alignment or adjusted scale is treated with skepticism. This does not mean academics dismiss the map's importance. Quite the opposite. The Piri Reis Map is studied precisely because it shows how knowledge moved across cultures. It reflects the blending of Islamic, European, and ancient traditions. It captures a moment when the world was expanding faster than certainty. What it does not do in the academic view is overturn established history. That conclusion can feel unsatisfying to audiences drawn to mystery. It lacks drama. It offers no lost civilization, no forgotten global empire. But it does offer something else, a clearer picture of how fragile knowledge can be and how easily meaning can shift when context is removed. Still, even among scholars, the conversation is not closed. New digital tools allow for more precise map analysis. Ongoing research into medieval libraries continues to uncover forgotten texts. Each discovery adds detail, not shock, but detail matters. The persistence of debate, then, is not a failure of history. It is a reflection of its nature. Historical documents are incomplete by default. They survive by chance. We piece them together with care, knowing some edges will always remain rough. Chapter 10. Why the mystery still matters. More than 500 years after it was drawn, the Piri Reis Map still refuses to fade quietly into history. It has been measured, tested, translated, and debated. Its materials are understood. Its creator is known. Its era is well documented. And yet the map continues to pull people back in, again and again. Not because it proves something radical, but because it sits at the edge of what we can fully explain. In a world where satellites photograph every corner of the planet, it is rare for an object this old to still raise honest questions. The Piri Reis Map does not challenge science directly. It does something more subtle. It exposes how much of our past depends on fragments, on chance survival, and on interpretation. This is where the mystery truly lives. Most ancient knowledge did not survive. We know this not because of what we have, but because of what we can trace indirectly. References to lost books, mentions of charts no longer extant, citations copied from copies of copies. The ancient world produced far more maps than the handful that remain today. What we see is the residue, not the whole. Piri Reis himself seemed to understand this. His notes do not claim completeness, they acknowledge missing pieces. He describes charts gathered from many hands, many eras, many traditions. His map is not a declaration, it is a snapshot of accumulated knowledge at a single moment in time. That matters because it reminds us how fragile information really is. A fire in a library, a war that scatters scholars, a shift in language that renders old texts unreadable. Knowledge can vanish without drama. When it does, later generations are left to reconstruct the outline from what remains. This is why lost source maps matter, even when they cannot be found. Historians do not assume these sources contain secret truths, but they do accept that earlier generations may have had different ways of organizing and visualizing the world. Some of those ways were practical, others were theoretical. Over time, the difference between the two blurred. The Piri Reis Map sits at that blur. For modern audiences, especially those drawn to ancient mysteries, this creates a powerful tension. On one hand, science offers strong explanations. On the other, the map carries hints of stories we can no longer fully trace. The space between those two positions is uncomfortable, and that discomfort keeps curiosity alive. There is also a human element that cannot be ignored. We are drawn to the idea that the past knew more than we think, not because we want to reject modern knowledge, but because it suggests continuity. It suggests that discovery is not a straight line forward, but a cycle of remembering and forgetting. In that sense, the Piri Reis Map becomes symbolic. It represents the possibility that knowledge can be lost and later misunderstood, not through conspiracy, but through time. This is why the map appears so often alongside discussions of unexplained ruins and sunken structures. Not because it proves those stories, but because it shares their emotional gravity. Each reminds us that history is incomplete. Importantly, this does not mean anything is possible. The strongest lesson of the Piri Reis Map is not that ancient civilizations mapped Antarctica. It is that interpretation matters. When context is removed, mystery grows. When context is restored, mystery changes shape rather than disappearing. Even today, scholars continue to study the map, not in search of shocking revelations, but to better understand how early modern thinkers processed a rapidly expanding world. The early 1500s were a time of uncertainty. New lands were being encountered faster than old ideas could adapt. Maps became places where certainty and speculation met on the same page. That blending is still visible. The map's endurance also says something about us. We live in an age of information, but not necessarily of understanding. When we encounter an artifact that resists easy answers, it reminds us that knowledge is layered. Some layers are visible, others remain buried, and perhaps that is enough. The Piri Reis Map does not need to overturn history to matter. It matters because it forces careful reading. It matters because it shows how easily assumptions can harden into beliefs. And it matters because it demonstrates that even well-studied artifacts can still teach us humility.